All right, y'all. How's everyone doing? Who did karaoke like me last night and lost her voice singing George Strait?
What song did you sing?
Say that again?
What song did you sing?
All My Exes Live in Texas, which my wife is looking at me in the crowd with a good laugh. But good morning, everyone. Welcome to the mining stage here at the Bitcoin conference. What a week. Super exciting. It's going to be the hugest conference that we've ever been to. My name is Gutierrez. I'm at Giga Energy and really excited to be hosting this panel on the grid and Bitcoin mining. And with me, we have industry leaders, not only from the energy side, but also on the Bitcoin mining side across development, generation, and utilities. And so today we'll really take a journey on why Bitcoin is a great partner to the grid. Where are we seeing that? What have we been able to do? And then also, what are some of the challenges? And how us as an industry, how can we work with our stakeholders on the energy side, with the communities, and obviously with the utilities to push things forward? And then obviously at the end, what's the future look like? It sounds like we have other types of compute. What does the grid of tomorrow going to look like? And so before we get started, it is my pleasure to have our panelists today. I'll let them give a little bit of their background and we'll dive straight into it. Kerri.
Hi, thank you for having me here. My name is Kerri Langlais. I'm the Chief Strategy Officer of TeraWulf Inc. We're an energy infrastructure company that mines Bitcoin and builds data center leveraging zero carbon resources.
Ken Draper, I'm Chief Commercial Officer at IREN. We're a listed next generation data center platform.
And I'm Austin Mitchell. I am the CEO of Synota. And at Synota, we sell software to energy suppliers, utilities, and power producers that enables them to settle energy contracts on a daily basis. You may think, well, why would you want to actually receive an invoice and pay an invoice every day? But what our software does is it fully automates that whole process and enables the energy suppliers and their customers to get better commercial terms that are ultimately more capital efficient and flexible.
Awesome. Thank you, guys. So we have all these electrons currently energizing this conference right now, and we sometimes don't think what it takes to do that, right? Where's that electron being produced? How is it getting here? Who's consuming it? And the grid of today wasn't the grid of 30 years ago. And Kerri, I'd love to hear from your point of view, having experience on the generation side. What has your experience been, or where has Bitcoin mining been able to fit in with where generation plays in the grid in that regard?
So the background of our management team is in energy infrastructure. So we've actually been building, operating, and deploying energy assets both here in the US and overseas. I think what's important to understand about Bitcoin mining is sort of the shift in the energy grid with the influx of renewable resources, right? You used to have a grid where you had baseload power plants located outside of high load centers, New York City, LA, and those assets would ramp up and ramp down to follow the demand. Now you have intermittent resources like wind and solar, and those present themselves when they want to. The wind usually blows at night and the sun usually shines during the day. And so now you have a situation where the grid has effectively been flipped on its head, right? Where you have what historically has been the supply following the demand. Now you need the demand or the load to follow the supply. And so that's very critical when you think about Bitcoin mining, because it's a significant load and probably the most purest form of flexible load that there is. It can turn off in a matter of minutes. It doesn't care where it's located. It doesn't care what time of the day it is. So it's an incredible tool that can be used by the grid operators to help balance the intermittent resources that are now predominant in our energy grid.
Yeah, beautiful. It's something that, being in Houston, Texas, I really appreciate all the Bitcoin miners curtailing from 5 to 8 p.m. so I can turn on my AC in that regard. But it's obviously so much more than that. And so as our grid, as Kerri mentioned, has really kind of taken a flip on its head, you're having all this energy supply be created away from where the demand is. And whether that's in upstate New York, where you have hydro, as an example, where TeraWulf is mining, or for example, Kent, out in North Texas. Please share with us, where IREN is positioning itself from what I understand in a very small town in the middle of nowhere, for lack of better terms. how does IREN look at solar and wind as a strategic energy asset for you guys?
Yeah, so one of the key elements of what we do with our data center operations and Bitcoin mining operations is that we're at 100% powered by renewable energy. So we locate all of our projects in areas where there is an abundance of renewables. And our Texas site is a very good example of that. It's located in West Texas. And the dynamics of that part of the grid are that there's about 40 gigawatts of renewable energy and only about 12 gigawatts of transmission capacity down to the load centres, so Dallas, Houston, etc., in other parts of the state. And what our operations do, and I think this is one of the elements that is quite misunderstood in the broader public discourse, is that there's a statement out there that Bitcoin miners are bad because they use a lot of energy. Well, actually, what we're doing is we're supporting additional generation on the grid that wouldn't otherwise be there. And then when there are conditions on the grid where the demand and supply balance is very tight, as was mentioned, Bitcoin mining is an incredibly flexible load. We can curtail within minutes and free up that energy for other users on the grid. So this is incredibly important because the fact that load is there, the Bitcoin mining load, it actually creates a signal and a demand that encourages additional generation to come into the grid. So not only is it used to help support the supply-demand balance on the grid, but it is actually encouraging renewables and encouraging more generation that can then be used to support the grid in times of need.
Oh, excellent! So it's your first customer of energy and it's your last customer of energy, right? No matter the price, that happens to be very price sensitive, and it's for a lack of better terms, it's much easier to turn off the light switch, right, than it is to ramp up a power generation facility, and the end benefit, we all benefit from in that regard. Obviously there's operational synergies, but I think a main story to tell is also the financialization or the finance synergies that you have with these energy asset holders, where they understand they have a predictable buyer of that energy. They can underwrite this generation that we need to grow. Austin, from talking to suppliers on the energy side of things, what are some key highlights that you think our audience could take away from regarding how the supply side is looking at flexible load in that regard?
Yeah, so I think the one thing that I would just echo and bring to the fold is it really is changing the economics of the grid itself. And so as we talk about the flexibility of Bitcoin mining load, what's inherent in that is a price sensitivity. And for a very long time, a lot of how our grid has been developed and assets have been deployed has not been around sort of the true economics or the cost of power. But Bitcoin miners, in how they're interacting, with the grid and with energy suppliers and producers, is they're really driving forward this, let's pay the price for energy that it actually costs in the moment that we're using it, and that is another paradigm shift that will benefit everybody that is on the grid in the long term.
No, definitely. And, I think we definitely have buy-in from the energy sector. This panel is proof of that. But there's always FUD out there, right, no matter where you are. And so kind of, maybe switching, gears to some of the current difficulties or challenges that our industry faces, and I'll open this up to the panel. What would be something or what is a common topic when it comes to talking to utilities or regular stakeholders that you think our audience could really, benefit from knowing about? What are we talking to our regulators? Are we talking to our utilities? Opening it up to the floor.
I'll start. So our facility, Lake Mariner, is located in upstate New York, where we're directly connected to the grid, and our utility is National Grid. And I'd say, we have a very open dialogue with the grid to make sure that they understand. So part of it's just education, making sure they understand how our facility operates, how quickly it can be turned down, and then on the inverse, also understanding their needs. And so there we participate in 3 demand response programs where they use our facility and our site as a tool for when prices spike, for when transmission is constrained, typically during the summer months when our the heat is at its highest. And I'd say, in that dialogue, I think probably the biggest challenge is just time to implementation. Most of these utilities aren't used to acting at light speed, not to use a pun, but and so it can be frustrating at times, and even complicating that. Sometimes you're dealing with more than one utility that needs to coordinate with each other, so that just draws out the timeline even more. So I think, all things being said, though, that's not a tremendous barrier or burden to getting these things done. It just requires persistence and ensuring that the dialogue, again, is open and constructive.
So definitely at a different frequency than Bitcoin price is tracking, which is what really underwrites our priorities, right? To maybe build on that, Austin. I know that Synota has been involved with conversations with AEP Ohio around flexible load in the state. Would love to hear about, AEP covers many different states in that regard. How are things in Ohio from that regard? How can Bitcoin mining kind of continue the conversation there?
Yeah, thanks, Mario. So, one of the interesting things, just to kind of set a little bit of context, is AEP Ohio is the largest utility in the state of Ohio, and Ohio is one of the deregulated states like Texas and Pennsylvania and some other areas where you see the biggest growth in Bitcoin mining and flexible load data centers. So recently, AEP Ohio, which is part of AEP, they have operating companies in 11 states. So what's happening there really matters both to deregulated markets, but broadly to other states where energy policy is largely done at a state level. What they're basically saying is that the data center demand is such that it's way beyond what the current amount of demand that they have on the system. So think 6 times in their forecast of load coming onto the system than what they currently have the ability to support. And you would think as a utility that makes money investing capital and building infrastructure, that they would be excited about this, but they're actually terrified. And they're terrified because that is a lot of money to be investing in an industry that is new. They don't understand all the counterparties. They think, there's essentially they're looking at this and saying there's a lot of financial risk. And so in response to that, what they're doing is they're asking the commission in Ohio to put financial protections in place that would essentially put all of the costs of the infrastructure and the future energy costs and everything like that to be paid up front. And what that basically does is it creates a giant barrier to the market where it's really only going to be the companies like Amazon, Google, Facebook, or Meta that will be able to essentially afford to enter the market. And so I think that's a really negative response to what is an opportunity, but they're sort of hamstrung with the current way that financial settlements and things happen within the space. And so the one reason why we've gone the lengths of putting comments in is because we see technology as being a key part of the solution. How the grid has operated in the past doesn't mean that that's how it needs to operate in the future, and I think Bitcoin miners can play a large role in driving those changes forward.
Definitely, it's always a conversation, right? And I would say an example. I come from the oil and gas business, where you could say that because we perhaps as an industry we're in advertising, we're talking, we're being proactive from a narrative response. We saw significant headwinds in the last 20 years, and I really admire everybody here on the panel and many of our public peers going on the offensive in regards to education and working with our utilities. Going down from PJM and NISO all the way down to ERCOT. The large flexible task force, right? It sounds interesting. It sounds like maybe they should be checking security on the other side of the room. When your team has a developer background, there's still a lot of solar, a lot of wind in Texas to develop. What type of conversations are you having on that load that will eventually get built? And what are some of the main concerns from from task force or from other stakeholders in ERCOT?
Yeah, so I think this is driven very similar to the AEP Ohio issue in that ERCOT is seeing an inundation of new load requests onto their grid, and it's unprecedented in terms of the levels of demand that they're seeing for new grid connections. And from their perspective, as you can understand, they want to try and manage that. Their current policies and procedures are having difficulty keeping up with the level of connections. It's turning into a very long grid connection process. And so they've created this large load task force to try and deal with that. So conceptually, no issues with that overall. It makes absolute sense where conditions on the grid change for them to look at how best to change their policies and procedures. But there are a number of challenges that come out of it, and one of the ones that we particularly are seeing is that as part of the large load task force, they're looking at potentially mandating cryptocurrency and Bitcoin mining loads as a specific type of load rather than letting the individual companies choose how they operate as a load. And without going into too much detail, anytime a load connects in ERCOT, there are a number of different designations that you can select for your load. So that's just one example where we see a challenge. We don't ever want to be in a position where we're told you have to do this. We would always prefer to have the choice. So there are a number of issues like that arise through that task force. We also have operations in British Columbia, in Canada, and like a number of other provinces within Canada, British Columbia is also seeing similar issues. So 5 years ago when we entered there was a significant surplus of electricity. They're now worried that with increasing electrification and electrical uses within industrial and manufacturing industries, that they're going to be short of power. And so they've actually put a moratorium on new crypto connections in a number of provinces. Now, we think this is short-sighted. Obviously, that's a biased view, but there is a lot of good that can come out of our loads being located in these provinces and a lot of benefits that it can bring. So, a different set of challenges, but, these are the things that we're working through.
Yeah. So I was just going to echo and say I really do think it is short-sighted. So all of the changes that, the Bitcoin mining industry, which I think has, surprised a lot of folks, it wasn't really that big of an industry just 4 or 5 years ago. Everything that is now being forced through Bitcoin mining, it was going to have to happen anyway. We're going to have to start to make these types of changes to support electrification. Everything that is part of any policy in most developed nations is pointing us towards a future with electric vehicles and things like that, where we are going to need to be able to support considerably more electricity consumption in way away from the traditional load centers. So this is just pushing the issue, and I think that's why we have to continue to lean into it and demand that as an industry we maintain that flexibility. We maintain the right to use electricity as we see fit and participate in the market freely.
Yeah, and you also see some really interesting dichotomies. So, for example, in Canadian provinces, if you tell them you're building an AI data centre, you're welcomed with open arms. We ourselves are running a cloud service for AI servers out of the very same facilities that we're doing Bitcoin mining out of. It's the same infrastructure. It is the same staff that are operating these facilities, but yet on one side they say we don't like your Bitcoin mining load, but we love your AI load, which again I think is very short-sighted because it's the same infrastructure, it's the same set of skills that is going to drive these economies forward.
No, definitely. And speaking of AI, the elephant in the room that nobody was really talking about back when the last time Bitcoin was over 60, right? Is that, and there's a big demand. We're entering a place where big tech is very much now intersecting with big energy, and whether some might say Bitcoin mining competes with that demand. I think, or I'm an optimist, that it's more complementary. I think of Bitcoin mining somewhat as an exploration well. I'm a geologist by background. You go de-risk, you are able to cash flow and make sure all the infrastructure works out, and then you're able to bring in a large industrial or enterprise client or HPC partner that maybe doesn't want to take that exploration risk, but definitely can come in and develop all the opportunity. And a story that I really, really, really love is the behind the meter story that TeraWulf is part of in Susquehanna. And Kerri, with the audience, please, would love to hear more about, the benefits of co-locating next to, a nuclear facility.
Sure. Our Nautilus crypto mine facility is actually the first Bitcoin mining facility in the U.S. to be directly connected to a nuclear power station. So we're located in central Pennsylvania and connected to the 2.5 gigawatt Susquehanna nuclear station. And I think, as I mentioned, and as you sort of alluded to, Bitcoin mining is the perfect form of flexible load, and it is a perfect anchor tenant to help absorb the tremendous fixed cost that it takes to operate a nuclear power facility. Just to give you a sense, there's 1,600 employees that operate that facility every day. It's a tremendous lift to keep that operating around the clock, nonstop. Now as you think about, the tremendous demand that's going to be coming from AI, I mean, the research is estimating, today about 17 gigawatts of power is used to support data centers. That's expected to triple in the next 3 to 5 years, to 30, 40 gigawatts. And to put that into context, the state of California is an 85 gigawatt grid. It's the 5th largest economy in the world. So you're talking about adding half of the state of California to a grid that over the last 15 years has grown at maybe 0.5% per year. So there's going to need to be some tremendous changes with how these significant loads are operating with the grid, because otherwise it won't work and we'll all be paying these tremendous power prices. So we're seeing a real convergence of data and energy. And this is, the short-sightedness of whether it's Bitcoin mining, which as Mario said, is kind of very complementary. Bitcoin mining can be very flexible. It can turn off, it can turn on. It doesn't care what time of day, it doesn't care where. Data centers typically want to be operating, some of the hyperscalers 5 nines, so 99.999 and sometimes even 7 nines. And so to have a tremendous load that today isn't really that flexible, and thinking about adding that to a grid that has a tremendous amount of intermittent renewables that are going up and down, that equation doesn't work. And so there's going to need to be a new way of thinking in order to implement these types of loads into the grid that's evolving and, as I said, has been flipped on its head.
No, definitely. It's guys, it's going fast. Yeah. It's very exciting. And with so much changing, let's look to the future. Let's look to tomorrow. Austin, you're on the software side. You've been on the utility side. What's the grid like going to look tomorrow? Is it going to be are Bitcoin miners and my Netflix server going to talk to each other so it powers down so I can watch my show at 5 p.m. when the sun's going down? What does the grid of tomorrow look like?
Yeah, that's exactly it. And I think just to build what Kerri said, this is an exciting time. In energy, this is a generational opportunity happening before us. And so I think anybody in this space or tangential, there is going to be abundance of opportunities on the pathway to abundant energy. And so when I think about what does the future look like, I think the number one trend in energy is just decentralization. We built the grid of today, in a very centralized model, and that made sense for the time. But now as, sources of power and energy become, more distributed, the grid itself is going to become more decentralized. And that's a good thing. And so, what does that ultimately mean? You also have more complexity in contracts. You have more parties involved in bringing, power to your home or to your business. It could be your neighbor providing you power. But the point is that there's going to be a whole lot more participation in the energy economy. And there's going to be a whole lot more people that need to understand sort of the value they're receiving or the value that they're giving back in terms of electrons or dollars or whatever the currency is. And so when I think to the future, you can imagine, every node of the energy system, being able to financially settle, in real time for the energy that's being consumed across, various complex, structures and, across multiple parties. So I just sort of think that you have a really great settlement layer paired up with this decentralized energy system.
Excellent. Well, guys, I know we're going to want to stay on time today. This has been an amazing conversation. I hope everybody's really enjoyed. I like to end these panels with parting thoughts, whether a joke or something that really catches your attention. Ken, we'll start with you and we'll round out the panel.
Yeah, sure. No joke for me, unfortunately. But yeah, I just think we're in an amazing time. You've got these digital technologies that are growing exponentially, whether it's Bitcoin, whether it's AI. You've got to support those with real-world infrastructure. You've got this changing dynamic in energy markets and the way that the grid operates. And we sit at the intersection of all those things. So, yeah, it's an amazing time. I feel incredibly lucky to be involved in this industry, and the opportunities are huge ahead of us.
Yeah, same thing. I think going back, this is a generational opportunity, and in Bitcoin mining, the folks, in this conference hall today, we are 2 steps ahead of any other, industry, industrial sector interacting with the grid, and I think that's to our advantage to really continue to push the envelope, continue to take risk, and find ways to add value to that energy system of the future.
I don't have anything funny to say, but I would say that, as we think about this convergence of data and energy, we all walk around with effectively computers in our pocket every day, and things are happening real time, and new solutions are being developed so that things can happen instantaneously in sort of a symbiotic relationship. So I think when you think about Bitcoin mining companies and service providers and the value inherent in the infrastructure to sort of power these new generations of AI or HPC or Bitcoin mining, it's incredible. And so I just think it underscores the value in the service that we're providing every day.
Guys, thank you so much. I'm really, really bullish on the future. You could say we're going to build the best grid, the biggest grid that we could ever have. We might hear something about that tomorrow, as well as I'm sure. Everybody, please thank our panelists for a wonderful conversation.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Next year, we are bringing the Bitcoin conference to the American West, Las Vegas. The brightest minds in the world will converge to deliver Bitcoin history. Buy your tickets now at b.tc/conference/2025.